Here is Pastor Bill Tansey with this week's message from New Horizons Church.
If you allow me, I'll make one last reference to Christmas. I heard a comedian this week. I don't know his name. I wish I did. I just caught the tail end of it I'm a great radio listener. I was listening to a talk show, and they brought this comedian on, and I just got the tail end of his shtick. But he said this. He said, I don't say Merry Christmas anymore. It's I'm told it's not acceptable, and I just quit saying it. He said, in place of Merry Christmas, I say this: well, warmest greetings as we celebrate the birth of the divine Lord, the King of Kings and the God of all creation. And that kind of sums it up, does it not? Well, there's been a popular movie this winter. I haven't seen it, so I don't know to recommend it. I don't know how good it is, but it's very popular. And the movie is David. It's an animated account of the life of David. Maybe some of you have seen it. I haven't. I hope it's accurate. But in any case, if nothing else, that movie raises an awareness of a biblical character, which raises an awareness of the Bible and an awareness of God. And in that movie, I'm told that we see David do what we're talking about in this series of messages. He demonstrates unshakable faith. And we're going to look at that today, because that unshakable faith is something that we can learn from this scrawny young lad who took on a giant. He literally did this. It's not a myth. It's not an exaggeration. It is a fact. And this young boy who, in the face of the most treacherous enemy, when everyone else had just thrown up their hands and said, we're lost, he said, in the name of the Lord, I'll face that giant, and God will destroy that giant. So it's the account of David and Goliath, and it's the second in this series of demonstrations of unshakable faith that we can learn from in God's Word. And this is a very familiar story to you, and because of that, I realize that we can just kind of gloss over some of the details. But the facts are that this young fellow is going to teach us courage. He's going to teach us faith. He's going to teach us how to overcome what seems to be impossible. Now, here's the background. We'll look at the background and then we'll look at the passage. David was the youngest of 12 sons. His father's name was Jesse. We don't know his mother's name. Extra biblical accounts give a name for her, but we don't know for sure what her name was. And one day, the nation of Israel was at war with the pagan Philistine army. Now, that in itself was a problem, because the Hebrew soldiers were mainly shopkeepers and farmers and merchants that they called to volunteer into the army. But those Philistines, they were the real deal. They were professional soldiers. They were vicious. They were tough. They were well armed. And so just that alone spelled the doom for the Hebrews. And one day, as they were at war, we find that they were facing each other on these two hillsides over a valley called Elah. I've been there several times. It's a beautiful place, and it has a natural echo in it. It's like an amphitheater almost. So imagine in your mind's eye, on one hillside were the Hebrews with their arms crossed and scared and their knees knocking. On the other side of the valley were the Philistines who were shaking their fists at the Hebrews. And in the middle was this valley of Elah, where they had hoped, the Philistines, that they could fight the Hebrews. So that's the strategic military part of this. And his brothers joined the army, went to fight, and David stayed back. Why? Because he was the runt. He was the youngest. He was small. He wasn't called to battle. So as each day progressed, we see the Philistines intimidating the Hebrew army. How did they do that? Well, they brought out an intimidating giant of a man who was a warrior, who had a bloodthirst for the Hebrews, who was a soldier, and his name was Goliath. Now, that word Goliath has been coined for any kind of challenge that we face in life that's bigger than us. Well, that's who that is. And he stood, experts tell us, 9 feet 9 inches tall at least. That's a big man. And he was terrifying, he was huge, he was vulgar, and he was constantly coming out into the valley, and they could hear his bass voice echo from one side of the valley to the other as he cursed the Hebrews and cursed their God. Well, he mocked them. And as he mocked God, we see that he came to fight, but the Hebrew king, King Saul, was scared to death of him, and he did nothing. After all, Goliath was huge. He was menacing. He had this bloodthirst that I mentioned. And after all of this, we find that he was in charge. He was large and in charge, this Goliath. Now, we're told where Goliath came from. He came from the town of Gath. There were 5 Philistine cities. Gath was noted for one thing. It was a huge trade center, and it also had a number of giants living there. Joshua 11:22 says that there was a race of giants, they're known as Anakim, who were huge and dangerous, that came from Gath. Now, Joshua wrote that 400 years before this account, but there were still some vestigial giants still floating around in the region, and Goliath was one of them. And there was not one Hebrew soldier that could compete against this giant if you just looked at it. It would be David against Goliath, as we would say in our parlance. So day after day, this Goliath came out spewing hatred to the Hebrews and to their God. It was humiliating. And his voice was horrible. His blasphemy was horrible. His voice echoed. And as he would do that, the Philistine soldiers would cheer him on. Well, I'm sure as they were cheering him on, the Hebrews wanted to cover their ears. They couldn't stand it. Day after day, they could hear this man do this giant do this. And that was his exact intention. He wanted to demoralize them. He wanted to instill fear into them, because if they were dismayed and afraid, they would be ineffective. And the reason why he came out every day in full battle equipment, and the reason why he paraded in front of the Israelite army, was that he wanted them to be dismayed. He wanted them to shake in their boots, and he was being successful. You see, the devil knows this. In any contest that we face, spiritual or otherwise, it's always useful for him to demoralize his victim. Because if we give up before the battle even starts, he's won. And his opponent is striking fear into the Hebrews at this moment as they face him. So if you are demoralized, first, you may never enter into battle. You may just give up, pull the sheet over your head and say, I quit. I'm not going to face this challenge in my life. And then secondly, if you go into battle, your knees may be knocking and you might say, I don't stand a chance here. So he wanted them to be filled with fear and apprehension, and he was quite good at what he did, this Goliath. How long did he do it? He did it for 40 days, day after day after day. Johnny One Note. He just kept doing it and kept rubbing it into their faces. And every morning when they awakened, they would waken to his loudmouth voice. Every night when they would go to bed, he would come and he would do it again. So the first thing that we learn from Phil instilling Goliaths in our life is they are relentless. They can evade our conscious, they can evade our subconscious. We can even dream about the problems that we're facing. And that's what Goliath was doing. So what made matters worse? The Spirit of God had abandoned the king of the Hebrews. He no longer was the spiritual giant of men among all the Hebrews. We find that in 1 Samuel 16:14, it says that now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul. That's because he had been disobedient and he had rejected God. And he was filled with a spirit of his own that he had to deal with. So this once proud leader, this great man Saul, now was a sniveling coward as he faced Goliath. Their leadership was gone. And when there's no leaders, when there's no good leadership, a country will suffer. And that's what they were doing. So then the amazing happens. We're going to find in 1 Samuel 17:32-33, and then I'll skip down to 37-49. It's a little long, but not too long. We're going to see the amazing happens. This scrawny little boy by the name of David shows up at the battle scene. And he says, what in the world? He said, what is that uncircumcised giant doing down there, blaspheming my God? And he shows up, and he gets a dramatic meeting with Saul set up, and he goes in and he says, I volunteer. I'll take him on. So if you'll stand with me, I'm going to be in 1 Samuel 17, verses 32-33, then I'll skate down to 37. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with the Philistine. And Saul said to David, you're not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, and will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And David said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. Verse 38, then Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail, and David strapped his sword over his armor. And he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached he approached the Philistine, and the Philistine moved forward and came near to him, and with his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give you flesh to the birds. I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, and all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. And when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, and slung it, and it struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell onto the ground. This is the word of the Lord. Please be seated. Well, David actually entered the scene as a delivery boy. He came from Bethlehem, the house of bread. Here he is delivering bread. He brought some supplies to his brothers and some of the other soldiers. thought he was just going to do his dutiful service to the Lord there and deliver these goods to the soldiers. Little did he know what this day would hold. So this youngest son brings food to the brothers, and that's when he witnessed the Goliath show. He looked over there and thought, what in the world is going on here? We hear the first recorded words of David in the Bible in this passage in verse 26 of chapter 17. Listen to what he says. Who does this uncircumcised Philistine think he is? Does he think that he can speak against the armies of the living God? Notice how he kept his emphasis on God from the very beginning. And he pondered it, he looked it over, and that promoted a feeling within him to volunteer to fight Goliath. And that begins a dramatic scene, a dialogue between him and Saul. I didn't read it all. It's an incredible scene there. Saul had never seen David. And he goes up to the great king of the Hebrews and he says, your servant David will fight this Goliath. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? He says, yes. He said, I will go and fight this Philistine in the name of the God of hosts. Now, Saul had waited so long for someone to come and volunteer to do that. Over 40 days, most likely. But now to hear those words out of the mouth of this scrawny boy almost seemed like a cruel joke. He's thinking, of all people, why would this little run of a kid want to face Goliath? So the good news was that someone had volunteered to fight Goliath. The bad news was it was a little shepherd boy from over in Bethlehem. Well, he says to David, he said, hey, this is ludicrous. He will eat your lunch. He's a professional soldier. He's a giant. He's 9 feet 9 inches tall. You won't stand a chance. He will wipe you out. You are small. He is gigantic. You're inexperienced, and this giant is a vicious killer. But there was something different about David. God was in his heart. And he places everything, all his faith, which was unshakable, he places it all on God in this matter. Well, let me ask you this. Have you ever faced a Goliath like that in your life? Are you facing one now? Sometimes they look so menacing, we just don't want to get out of bed in the morning. Perhaps it's chemotherapy or a prodigal son or a prodigal daughter, perhaps an addiction in your family or some medical diagnosis or the death of a loved one or family conflict. David demonstrates to us if we keep our faith in God, we can face those Goliaths. And that's what he does. Here's the point. All of us, make no exception about this, all of us in our lives are going to face Goliath-sized battles at one time or another. But when we do, remember, our Goliath-sized battles are no match with the great God who is within us. He refers to him in this passage as El Shaddai, the God of hosts. He said El Shaddai will defeat this giant. Well, Saul argued, but David wouldn't be moved. He was stubbornly committed to doing God's will in this matter. And finally, we see here, David, even as a child, had great persuasion skills. Here's the future king of Israel showing why he became king, because his communication skills even then were advanced. And he convinces Saul to allow him to do this. So he wanted to do it. Saul wouldn't give in. He wore him down with his persuasive skills. And finally, Saul says, enough, go do it. But if you're going to go do that, wear my armor. At least wear my armor. By the way, here's a little footnote in this. Most scholars will tell you that the Hebrews were looking to Saul to do the fight. He was supposed to be their great warrior, their great hero. He had chickened out of this thing. So now he wants to outfit David in his armor, his bronze helmet, his spear, his armor, his mail, his breastplate, that helmet, all that. And he says, put that on. And when David put that on, he could hardly budge. Dookie suggested I take a picture of one of the twins and one of my coats like this, trying to get around. Just imagine what that would look like. He couldn't budge. And he says, this is much too big and much too heavy for me. And what does he say? He says, I don't need that armor. And as it turns out, it wasn't needed. It was heavy. It was burdensome. It represented Saul. Who is David representing? He's not representing Saul with his advanced armor. He's representing the God of hosts, El Shaddai. Well, God alone is going to bring the victory in this. That is the key to this chapter. That's the key to our lives. When we face these kind of challenges in our lives, it's God and God alone is going to bring the victory. Now, does he ask us to prepare? Yes. Does he ask us to use these wonderful minds he gave us? Yes. But ultimately, we need to rest in his arms to get through the challenges we face. Well, old little David had something else in mind. He says, okay, here's what I'm going to take into battle. I'm going to take my shepherd's staff. I'm going to take my little leather bag. I'm going to go down to the creek, and I'm going to get five smooth stones and my sling, and I'm going to go face him with 5 stones. Every detail in the Bible, I think, is important. And there's been debate for centuries about why did he choose 5 stones? Now, the skeptics will say, well, maybe he chose 5 stones because he was a little bit fearful and he was doubting at this point. Maybe he thought it would take 5 stones to bring him down. That's a possibility, but I rather doubt it. I find no doubt in him at all. And some presume that perhaps he was thinking, okay, I'll be prepared. I'll have 5 stones, and after Goliath falls, I'll take on any Philistines that attack me after that. That's a possibility. But there's another opinion, and I hold to this one, and we can only speculate why he chose the 5 stones. But Goliath did have 4 brothers. 4 plus 1 make 5. He had 4 brothers, and I think at this moment, quite possibly, he was preparing to face all of them. Thinking, I'll take on the whole gang. If I had to take them all on, I'll have a stone for each one of them. Could have been very well been the truth. In 2 Samuel 21, 15 to 22, this passage lists about these other 4 giants that lived in the city of Gath. Name some of them. One was named Ishbi-Benob. He was a huge giant. His bronze spearhead weighed more than 7 pounds. He was either a brother or a cousin of Goliath. Another one was Saph, probably Goliath's brother. There was another one named Goliath, that must have been a family name. And there was an unnamed one who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes. I wouldn't want to get in a wrestling match with that guy. But in any case, with these 5 stones, what was he doing? He was preparing. God says, when you face a Goliath, get prepared. Place it under me and get prepared. And that's what he did. So here's this scrawny shepherd boy. He descends from one side of that hillside. And if you've ever been there, you can just imagine it happening before your very eyes. He comes down one side, and I think everything got silent. And they didn't have binoculars, so the Philistines were probably squinting their eyes thinking, now who is that coming down there? Well, that's a scrawny kid. That's a little shepherd's boy with his staff. They're sending him down to face Goliath. So here he descends down the hillside, and by any human standard, this is a ridiculous scene. This doesn't look like something that, if you were writing the story, that you would place as the key cast member here, this little shepherd boy. So there stood menacing Goliath, 9 feet 9 inches tall. Experts say he weighed somewhere between 600 and 700 pounds before he put on his armor. And he faces his opponent, and he's quite unimpressed, and he's nonchalant, and he begins to curse God even more. Look at verses 43 and 44. He looked at David and began sneering. Am I a dog that you come after me with a stick? Then he cursed David by his pagan gods. In the name of his pagan gods, he was cursing David. And he says to him, come here, son. Come here, boy. He says, I'm going to make roadkill out of you. He said, I'm going to feed you to the buzzards. I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to feed you to the wild animals. Now, remember this. When we face Goliaths in our lives, when we're facing that challenge that's brought into our lives, and we may all face one in 2026, who knows? When we do that, those Goliaths will fabricate the very worst things to imagine and be afraid of. And then what do? The psychologists say we catastrophize. We start thinking about the worst outcome. We start thinking about the worst. That's when they've succeeded. So that's what he says to David. He paints a picture there, the very worst outcome that David could face. He said, you're going to be killed, and I'll go feed you to the buzzards. I think that would make my mouth go dry if I would hear that. Well, imagine that going on, and imagine David, it not working. David just absolutely would not be forced to be fearful. Listen to his response in verse 45. He says, Goliath, you come to me with a sword. You come to me with a spear. You come to me with a javelin. You come to me with all that armor and all that size. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies. He said, I'm representing God in this matter. I'm representing El Shaddai. I come to you in the name of the God of heaven's armies. And then he said, you may be talking trash, but I'm talking to the Lord. And Goliath might have noticed what he said there. You see, this is key. David told Goliath he wanted to make sure he heard. He wanted to make sure the Philistines heard. His voice would have echoed through that valley. And he wanted to make sure his Hebrew brothers and King Saul, who was cowering and looking probably out of the slits of his tent, that he saw and heard why he's there. He says it is the Lord who will succeed in the battle, the Lord alone. When we started this church, the cornerstone of this church is we dedicated it to God. And because of that, I do believe we've seen so many prayers answered as this faithful congregation has lifted up some Goliath-sized enemies that we faced in with our families and others, the loved ones. What this dear church across the street is going through this morning just breaks my heart. With this pastor who has lost his life this week. They're not celebrating. They're going through a Goliath-sized battle. Pray for them this week. But in any case, he says it is the Lord. And then in verse 46, David starts prophesying. He says, here's what's going to happen to you, sir. He said, today, the Lord is going to conquer you. Today, the Lord will kill you. He didn't say, I'm going to do it. He didn't flex his muscles and say, I'm going to show you a thing or two with my exceptional speed. No, nothing like that. He said, today the Lord's going to do it. And then what does he do at verse 47? He connects all the dots of what's going to happen. He knew what would happen. He's acting as a prophet now. He said, this is why everyone assembled here. That's the Philistines, that's the Hebrews, that's you and me. Everyone that's here, he says, knows this, that the Lord rescues his people, but not with sword and spear. By the way, you can circle that his people in your Bible. You know who that is? That's us. We're part of his family. And the Lord absolutely does what David says. When we are in trouble, when we are going through horrible things, it is the Lord who rescues us. We looked at him last week as a refuge where we can run to when we face these Goliath-sized battles. So we're part of his people. That applies to you and me. And suddenly, when he says that upped the ante in this poker game, because suddenly Goliath is he is stiff-legged mad. He is on steroids now. David's words put Goliath in a fit of rage, and then it happened. He decided, Goliath says, I'm going to charge at him, and I'm going to wipe him out right here in front of everyone, including my gods. So as he ran to attack David, David was quicker than him. David moved a little more quickly. He reached into that shepherd's bag. He pulled out one of those 5 stones. He took that sling, and as Clay will tell you, in the Phoenician War, more people were killed by slingers than they were by spears. He took that sling, and he cast that stone toward Goliath. He hit him in his one vulnerable spot, right smack between the eyes and his forehead. And when he dropped, I don't think it was very quiet. He dropped like a ton of bricks. All 650 pounds of him fell down suddenly, and I think every jaw on both sides of the mountainside, every jaw dropped when they saw that happen. Did you just see what happened? How did that boy do that? That boy didn't do that. It was his God that did it. He made clear that everyone understood that. That's the power of unshakable faith. That's the power of someone that says, I'm going to face this problem. I'm going to go through it. I'm going to go through it with faith in God, not because I'm strong, but because he's stronger than any problem that I face. Well, how about your Goliath? Your Goliath may not carry a sword or a spear. Your Goliath may not approach you in your face once a day. He may be there all the time, just constantly bothering you. It may be a health crisis, maybe a broken family issue, it may be a shattered past. Your giant doesn't parade up and down ancient hills. He prances through your office, through your bedroom at night when you're laying there and you can't sleep and you're thinking about it. Then you finally go to sleep and you dream about it in your subconscious. But if that Goliath is in front of you, follow me here now. If that Goliath, if there is a Goliath in front of you, that means there is a David inside of you. The Holy Spirit of God resides in you. Do you not know that God's very Spirit abides within you, as Paul asks? So we believers can call on the same Lord that David called on, the Lord of hosts, El Shaddai. We can drop on our knees, call on him, and seek his help as we're facing these Goliath-sized challenges. Now, I'm not minimizing anything any of us are going through. Some of us are going through some tough stuff right now. I'm not here to say, just speak it and say it and it's all cured. I'm not here to do that. But I am here to tell you this. That God that David loved, that God that he spoke of, that God that he served is the same God that makes us part of his people, that he will give refuge to, and he will rescue when we are facing these problems. You see, we believers can call on the same God that he called upon, and that kind of unshakable faith will prevail. Let's look at the heart of the matter this morning. It's a little long today. How to have unshakable faith when facing Goliaths. Number one, embrace your strengths. God, what do I bring to this battle? Embrace your strengths. It might only be a shepherd's rod, or it just might only be a stone or two. David used his sling and stones, demonstrating that true strength comes within, not from external tools or resources. There's no technology that you can use that will defeat the Goliath unless God puts it in your hands as part of his plan. Number two, trust in God. That's hard to do. I know the first thing that we lose when we're attacked by a Goliath is our faith can diminish, but trust in God. David's faith in God was the driving force in his victory over Goliath. That reminds us that we should trust in God's plan and his support. And he does it anonymously. We don't know how he's going to do it. We don't know when, but he does. And then number three, ignore the naysayers. And this passage is full of naysayers, beginning with his brothers. His brothers gave him the dickens for even being there, little David. David's brothers and King Saul doubted his ability to defeat Goliath, but he chose to focus on his faith and his mission. There'll be those that will tell you, why don't you give up? No sense in fighting this battle. It's over. No, it isn't. And then the fourth one, focus on the victory. David did not focus on Goliath's size, but on the victory ahead, keeping his eyes on the goals and not the obstacles. Thank you for that kind of unshakable faith, David.
This has been the Sunday service from New Horizons Church, D Street in South Charleston. For your spiritual needs, our email, newhorizonschurch2021@gmail.com. Join us again next Sunday at 10:30 with Pastor Bill Tansey from New Horizons Church.